Hello and welcome to the Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust Wilder Lincolnshire podcast. I'm Melvin Pryor and I've arrived at a rather nice location, quite remote actually, just outside Woodhall Spa. And it's the old Woodhall Spa RAF base, and I've got Dave Bromwich here from the Trust. Hi Dave.
Morning Melvin.
This is quite a remote spot, but interesting. As I first arrived here, some massive military industrial looking gates to welcome me.
That's true, yeah, and it was a massive airfield and industrial site. So we've left those there, part of the story in a way.
Now this is incredible here really, because as I wander in, we've got a long tarmac road that goes right off into the distance. So was this the old air runway?
You're right on the base of the runway at the moment. This is the main runway, 6,000 feet long. So it's a huge...
6,000?
6,000 feet.
Wow.
Yeah, 2,000 yards. If you've got a Lancaster fully loaded up, you needed a long run at it to get airborne. But it's quite interesting because it also then became the haul road for the quarry in the 1970s and 80s. So it's been a dual function. So it's been very, very industrial for a long time.
Not the best of days to be here, but I would imagine, I'm just picturing this as quite a bleak area, and it would have been like that in the days of the war, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. It was just farmland and then taken over in 1941 for a runway as obviously Bomber County. We had these runways popping up all over the place. But yeah, big, flat, wide expanse, plenty of place to drop your aeroplanes in.
Quite interesting here also, because as I come on the site today, so we've got this long stretch of tarmac road right up the centre there, but each side of it, we've got some huge lakes. I assume the lakes weren't here at the time of the aircraft.
Yeah, they're very much recent addition. The last one was finished in 2014, so only just over 10 years old.
And the whole thing of this is basically showing how the Wildlife Trust works on a site like this with a military background.
We've got quite a lot of industrial nature reserves, surprisingly. Nearly half our nature reserves are of an industrial past. This perhaps is one of the more dramatic ones.
Yeah, the last one that I was out before Christmas was actually out at Donanook, which is still very much a military site, isn't it?
Yeah, Donanook is a live air weapons range. Wainfleet range was up until relatively recently. So, yeah, that kind of military practice here. Also around Woodhall, there's a lot of army bases as well, which is Root and Moor Wood was all an army base rather than RAF. So, yeah, huge military history.
As a way of respect, I suppose, you're not trying to disguise the fact that this is a military site and a military background. You're trying to let nature work with that, aren't you?
Very much so, yeah. When the quarrying was due to finish, part of the restoration was for all the concrete to be taken away. And we felt in discussion, with it being such a famous site, 617 Squadron were based here, that really wouldn't do it justice. And to keep the architecture of the military base in of the runways was so much of the story of the site. So, yeah, it was a conscious decision to leave all the concrete. A bit strange for a nature reserve.
Indeed. Nature behind us, there's some lovely catkins that are coming out just behind you at the moment as well. Quite a lot of bird life on the lakes, which we'll talk about in a moment. But what I also notice here, we've got very much fencing, marking it out very clearly before you get to the lakes. Now, very straight line fencing, is that from the military background as well?
It is, yeah. Aviation enthusiasts would recognise that. It's 150 feet across between the fencing.
Okay.
And that is the width of the old runway. All the runways were made very much to a standard form. So 150 feet across to try and give you the scale as we stand here to look over towards Ostler's Plantation, 2,000 yards away. A massive scale. Really.
Now, the thing I also noticed then, the tarmac road that I'm looking down isn't right in the middle of it, though, is it? So is this actually the runway, or am I slightly off the runway?
You're on the runway, but the tarmac bit is what was left from the quarry. So they used the base of the runway to then put their haul road on. So this had all the lorries going in and out for over 30 years, 6 million cubic metres of sand and gravel came out down this road.
Therefore, that's how we've got the lakes that have been created.
Yes, all the lakes, the hollows, we've got the filter beds, all the traditional habitats that we talked about from donkeys years ago at Wisby as well. Same thing, filter beds, silt lagoons, all those things, and then the Hall Road, the plant site, all the concrete areas.
Nice little visitors' hut here. Well, actually, it's for the volunteers to shelter in, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that's actually sitting on what you can see of the original runway, isn't it?
It is, yeah. As you look at the sides, you'll see black asphalt, or where that's worn off, the concrete underneath it underpinned it. And that's been left, we've deliberately left that. The hard, hot surfaces are rather good for lizards, basking animals, and increasingly we're finding mosses and lichens and little small plants that can't compete are starting to come back onto the hard infrastructure.
I suppose what the wildlife and nature will enjoy about this site, as I said at the beginning, quite remote, quite bleak, is that it is quite quiet. Nobody's disturbing anything.
It is quiet. It's a big site. It's 550 acres. And the access is confined to the runway just for safety reasons. So when we do have visitors, there's lots of rooms to spread and be on your own and enjoy the peace and quiet.
Let's talk a little bit about the wildlife we can see at the moment on the lakes here. It is quite a dull, drizzly day today, so things aren't that active. What have we got? Coot on here at the minute?
Yeah, it's a very, very important site for winter wildfowl. So we've got nearly all the duck species will occur. And the grazing is done to create the short grasses around the edges, so widgeon particularly good, and then the geese. So then we have the wading birds around the edges, increasingly egrets and heron. And then wading birds, lapwings, all the usual things, redshank, curlew. So yeah, it's got a very good bird list.
Did I see a quite a large egret gliding in a little while ago as well?
Well, on a good day, it's a 3 egret site, so you get cattle, little and great white.
Okay, differing in size?
Yeah, little is not...
Tiny?
Yeah, it's quite tiny, but not as small as cattle.
Okay.
Cattle are kind of hunched, very small.
So hang on, so the cattle egret is the smaller one?
Looks a bit smaller than little,
Okay,
yeah.
Then we've got the little egret.
Yeah, and then great white, which lives up to its name.
And I think that was a great, wasn't it?
It was huge, yeah. They're very impressive. Yeah.
It was really, really nice. Yeah. Now, when people come onto the site here, because people do like to come onto the site for the wildlife, but also to pay their respects if they've got connections with the war years.
We at the moment, I would say it's nearly 50-50. Definitely the aviation heritage and memorial is really important to visitors, yeah. We do quite a lot of effort goes into making that, interpreting it. We've had occasional coach tours. So, yeah, we're very keen to promote that.
And as you just come onto the site here, there's actually a poem that we'll put on the website and give the details of that. But this is a poem that sort of talks about the site here. It's called Furrows into Silence. The Lanks have left. From fenland skies, the clamour and the fret has gone. Their crews and those who watch with anxious eyes, for homing kites are long departed. That's the start of this poem here by Philip A. Nicholson that people will see when they first come onto the site. But also on the site, which we're going to go to in a moment, there is a memorial here, isn't there?
Yes. As we were working with the gravel company, and we started to make some comments and things on social media, and Rachel Shaw had put a little piece about taking it on, and a gentleman called Wing Commander John Bell saw this, and he's a veteran of the site. He was a Lancaster bomber aimer, and he got in touch with us and said, would we like to do more things with it? And he came here in November 2015 for a visit, and he was kind of our patron then. With his backing, we really knew that the heritage was important, and he promoted that, and he brought that poem for us. That was his favourite poem, and he used to stand at the memorial and read it. Sadly no longer with us as of last year, but an incredible gentleman, 6'4" tall, but was the bomb aimer. And at 90, when he came to see us, incredible handshake, incredible presence, huge aura around the man.
Well, let's move up to the memorial, have a look. And there's some interesting news to tell about the memorial as well, and what you're hoping to do in the future. So, Dave, we've actually moved from the entrance to the reserve here. but we're still only halfway along the main runway.
That's 1,000 yards in, yeah, and we continue to the north.
We have cheated. We have brought the vehicles, haven't we?
It's a very cold day.
It is a very, very cold day. I've just seen that egret flying across in the distance there as well. But as I turn and look in that direction, the other half of the runway would have taken us all the way to those trees, wouldn't it?
Yeah, another 1,000 yards. Yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's a long way. Most of that end of the main runway was lost to quarrying. So there are ditches, and you can see if you look on Google Maps, be able to see the ditch lines, and so you can still see what we call the ghost runways. So we do know where they were, and perhaps one day, I don't know, with a bit of landscape architecture, we could even try and recreate them as we've done in other parts of the site.
And do I remember that as being classed as Ostler's Plantation?
That is Ostler's Plantation, yeah.
Yeah, so local people will know where we're talking about here.
Indeed, yeah. We're at the south end of that. So if you walk all the way through Ostler's Plantation, you get wonderful views over the whole of this landscape.
I'm going to bring Kev James into the conversation, who's the warden for the local area here. This didn't look like this when you first came on site, did it?
No, it didn't. When the Trust purchased the site, there was mountains of spoil and aggregate left on the site. And because of the planning legislation at the time, we couldn't remove it from the site. We had to discreetly hide it around the reserve. And it was very much like when I'm sweeping up in my kitchen at home. I lift up the rug and sweep underneath the rug to hide thousands of tons of aggregate. We built a viewpoint, we've built tracks, we've landscaped the lakes to enable the wildlife to get access to the water for the waders. So it's completely changed in the last 10 years.
But something else you've actually created here is a special habitat for some nature, but they're not necessarily going where you thought they'd go.
I think it's a classic example about how nature will do what she pleases. Now, on the site, we've got plovers, little ringed, that would nest in the shingle on the gravel, and the Trust were concerned that by moving all the gravel we would dislodge the birds from their nesting sites. So we decided to cordon off an area at the end of the runway and cover it with shingle for the plovers to nest on, and they completely ignore it. And they nest exactly where they want to, less than 5 feet from where the visitors are walking around. So if you're very careful and very quiet, you can see these great birds.
And they just literally nest on the ground,
Little
do they?
ring plover just nest on the ground because they're more akin to nesting on shingle banks and shingle ridges. Because of the habitat, you can see them running around on the runway up by the memorial.
Well, who knows? They might put your shingle and to good use at some point in the future.
Yeah, they may do.
They may do.
They may do.
So I'm trying to put this in perspective because we're at a junction here, aren't we, of where two runways are crossed. As we sort of were heading towards here, there was another point, and as David explained earlier, it was like an A design, wasn't it?
Yeah. Most of the military airfields in the 1940s were all based on the same layout. There was 3 runways on the majority of sites, 3 runways so the planes could take off into the wind all the time. The whole site is surrounded by a perimeter track. So the Lancasters would taxi around, find the most suitable direction for the wind, aim for that runway so they can get off the ground.
And we were talking earlier, Dave, about the fact that there was this width that was 150 yards?
150 feet.
150 feet across. So it was like a sort of standardised kit that when they decided to put an airfield somewhere, it was to that standard.
Absolutely, yeah, because you've got all the drainage to go with that and all the wiring for the lights and everything else. Then all the buildings came as modular as well, so you could order so many Romney shelters, so many Nissan huts, all sorts of things. Yeah, it all came off a massive production line somewhere.
So I'm actually standing on what would have been the runway here now, but this was covered then in spoil from the quarrying. So how sort of deep was it?
It was probably maybe 40 feet, 50 feet deep in piles of sand, huge mountains of sand. There was one point where you could get onto one of the piles and see Lincoln Cathedral from the top of it. It would have been a great viewpoint if we could have kept it in there, but it would spoil the impact on the landscape.
So who made the decision that you were going to try and discover the runways again?
I think because of the nature of the site and the links with the past, RAF Woodhall is something that, one, it's a nature reserve, but two, the military pass is so important to everyone who comes to the site. So it was a whole trust effort to decide what we should do, but we were certain that we had to maintain as much of the military past as we could.
Did you have clues then as to where you would start searching to, move this spoil to discover the runway?
Yeah, we'd looked at aerial photographs, so we knew approximately the layout, and there was an awful lot about the site on the internet anyway, with it being 617 Squadron site after they left Scampton. So we got an idea. So it was just a case of getting some sticks out and shovels, and we had some help with the bulldozer. Some big.
Well, you'd need that if it was 40 feet deep. Goodness me.
I think we should also remember that the site itself was built by hand. This whole site was built by navvies with buckets and shovels. We've got 6 inches of concrete. We've got an inch of tarmac over this whole area, and it was done within a year. It's an enormous engineering feat to be done in such a short space of time.
So you decide to start clearing this, you move the spoil to different areas, you create different landscapes here as well. What was the situation with regards to the lakes when you first came on? Was any wildlife at all on the lakes?
I think that's the unique thing about nature. I mean, when we took over the site, originally we'd planned, because it's built on an historic heathland, we wanted to use that to expand our existing reserves in the area and have a dry, arid heathland. But when Cemex left, they turned the pumps off, and we hadn't realised that for 40 years they'd been pumping water out of the site so they could dig into the aggregates. So the whole place filled with water almost overnight. And on Christmas Eve in 2018, I was working on a digger on the main road trying to prevent the village from being flooded, where the water just filled the whole site almost overnight. So almost 70% of the site now, just over 70%, is a wetland site, or is affected by water in one way or another.
And how many lakes have we got here then?
Well, in the winter, there would probably be almost 20, I would think. But just looking in the summer, there's probably about 7 lakes that we've got that hold water all year round. But as the winter comes and the winter rains come, all these lakes flood, fill up, and you've almost got a continual body of water around the entire site.
And how do you manage that? I assume with a lot of help from volunteers, do you?
We have an enormous amount of help with our volunteers. Without our volunteers, we wouldn't be able to achieve what we've done here. But the practical management, we leave to our environmental engineers, which are our Lincoln Red cattle. They dictate how the habitat develops. They have free access over the site. They roam around and they manage the habitat for us.
Yeah, and on a previous podcast, we've actually talked a bit more about the cattle and their involvement, because they get moved around to various sites, don't they?
They do. There was a time when the Trust would rely on other people's livestock, and sometimes it wouldn't turn up, sometimes there'd be too many, they'd stay on for too long, or you may not get any at all. So it was really brave of the Trust to take that initial leap that we would have our own livestock, and it's taken 15 years now to build up that stock, and now we're at the stage where we're able to move them around to our other sites where our other wardens can manage the cattle, and they can say when they want them on and when they want them off, which is best for nature.
Dave was telling us about some of the bird life we were looking at. Is there other sort of forms of nature on the site? I noticed just to the side of us here, is that more of a heathlandy area?
What we've got at the airfield here, we're really lucky in that we've got many different habitats, and that's really down to the livestock. They're creating this mosaic of habitats. So we've got wet grassland, we've got open water, we've got scrubby woodland, we've got reed beds. We shouldn't forget the runway. The runway itself is really important habitat.
Moss on here at the minute.
It is. It's a dry, arid environment. So you get succulent plants here, you get alpine plants that you wouldn't usually see on many parts in Lincolnshire, except on these industrial sites that we've got. So we've got a whole suite of habitats, and we're really lucky to have them.
And I think that's part of it, because most people would think, well, for wildlife and nature, it's got to be, a lot of plants and things going on. They wouldn't look at the old runway and say, this is a habitat for nature.
Absolutely. It's probably the most important habitat that we've got here, not only because of the military past, but because the wildlife is slowly developing, it's recolonising. Nature just needs a little bit of help.
Well, where we're standing at the moment, the junction of the two runways here, we have got the memorial in memory of Woodhall Spa Airfield, opened 2nd of the 8th, 1941, closed in the October of 1967, dedicated to all units and personnel based here. And this is very significant because a lot of people do want to come and pay their respects, don't they?
Yeah, as we were talking earlier, probably 50% of our visitors want to be a part of the military past that we've got on the site. And we do have a lot of people making the long walk up the runway to come to pay their respects and to reflect.
As we say, it is a long runway. The plan is that you'll have some sort of recognition closer to the entrance to the site.
Yeah, I think a lot of feedback that we get from our older visitors and particularly our veterans, they find it extremely difficult to make. It's 1.2 miles to walk up here and back again. And even though it's probably our best site that we've got for access, it is a very long walk. But it would just make more sense if there was somewhere more accessible for everyone to get onto the runway and to be in a place where they can reflect on the past.
And what do you see it being? It's not a question of moving this memorial, is it?
No, we're going to keep the granite memorial up in the middle here because it's ideally located. What we're going to do down at the main gate, so you can come into the car park and walk straight into another area, which will be a steel roundel with a Lancaster cut out of it and some mosquitoes and RAF Woodhall and the Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust. And maybe if I can get my way, a couple of benches.
That would be very nice. But do we need funds to do that, Dave? What's the situation?
Yes, with all things with the trust, donations and funds. The purchase of the airfield was very kindly supported by some incredibly generous donations. So all was happy, and if anybody wants to become part of that, then that would be most appreciated.
And again, timescale-wise, is it just a question of when the funds are raised, we'll do it?
Yeah, it's basically, we've got a quote for the memorial, the roundel, everything's on standby. We're just raising funds at the moment now to get it done, and hopefully it would be great to get it up for the summer so we're ready for the Remembrance Sunday in November.
And I would imagine more details available on the website if people want to get involved with it.
Yes, of course, yeah. All the information is on the website. We're constantly looking to improve that and put more information about all the aspects of nature and the aviation history.
It does make you stop and think, doesn't it? This is quite an amazing site to be on. And you can't help but put your memory back to the days of when there would have been a busy site here with aircraft and personnel helping with the war effort.
There is a book called Into Thin Air, which was written about the airfield. It's out of print now, but you can still find it on the internet. It's an incredible read, the stories of the people who were here and what they did and what they achieved and the age of those people. You know, you've got air crews where the skipper's going out who's 22 years old. The rest of his crew are junior to that. And they were doing that for 4 years. Yeah, incredible stories from the place.
Well, if you'd like to know more about RAF Woodhall and the nature reserve here run by the Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust, then go to the website, get all the information there. We hope you've enjoyed this latest edition of the Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust Wilder Lincolnshire podcast.